Liz, can I just ask, we're going to go down the panel so we get people, so that we get voices, and just say who you are, for the sake of the record, Liz.
Yeah, I'm Liz Abrahams.
Can we have could we have quiet, please? We started.
Liz
sorry.
Abrahams.
Right.
Olga Budimir.
Kimber.
Pound. Katie O'Shaughnessy.
Do you think Nikki and Bethany might speak up?
Sorry.
No, right. Ruth.
Very much and welcome to the committee. Could I ask you to, in order, just say a few words briefly about what your experiences have been of juggling work with your caring responsibilities, please? Starting with Liz, is that okay?
Yeah, so my employer is very supportive of carers. They do have a flexible working and an agile working policy in place. We have a carers forum within the company that, along with sort of other disabilities and wellness, where they try and do social events, tea, coffee mornings, just to get people talking. If you feel uncomfortable talking to your line manager, then there's someone that will approach them for you. What I did find, though, as good as a company is at putting that in place, it depends on your manager. So my current manager is fantastic and supports it. My husband's currently in hospital. They're happy for me to leave at 3 every day, whatever I need to do. If I don't want to come in one day, I can just work from home. My previous manager about 4 years ago wasn't of the same attitude. So as good as a company can be, it really still, I feel it still depends on enforcing that within the manager.
Thank you. Are you able to tell us which is your employer?
I don't know, so I'm not going to.
That's fine. That's quite all right. But thank you, Olga.
I'm talking about the period of time when my father was diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma. At the time, my employers were Australian. They were an Australian advertising agency, and I'd been asked to set up the London advertising agency. I'd broken my arm, so for the first 3 months of my father's illness, I was pretty useless. So my sister sort of took on the brunt of that. My parents live in Staffordshire. My mum's still alive. And so there was lots of trips up and down the motorway to try and see what was going on with my dad. I approached my employers to talk about my hours, and they ignored me. They refused to respond to emails. I had one boss in Australia, one boss in the UK. I approached the boss in the UK to have meetings, and he just kept fobbing me off, cancelling the meetings and that sort of thing. After about 3 months of this, I then decided that my father needed me more than these people who were rude to not even talk to me. I thought my father needed me more, so I resigned and gave up work. I did tell them in my resignation email that the reason I was doing it was to care for my father, and also that I was prepared to work part-time if they could see a way to work part-time. They ignored that and sent round an email saying that I had just decided I no longer wanted to support the company going forwards, which I was going to reply to and say, no, I was going to support my dying father instead, but I chose to ignore that. And so I gave up work I gave up work in the June. My father died the following March. My mum is still alive, and I took up part-time work in September of that year, and so I care for my mum on a part-time basis. And she still lives in Staffordshire, so there's lots of going up the M6 again and the M40. My current employers have 63 policies. They don't have a carers policy. And I did mention to them I was coming to this meeting today, and they said, but we're happy to help out in every way you can, but it's all very dependent on who your line manager is, as this lady was saying. If you've got a good line manager, they will, I'm sure they'll help you out and they'll support you. But if you haven't got a good line manager, then they won't. And, whilst my line manager may be very good for me, if there's another carer in the company, who's to say they're getting the same sort of treatment? On the other hand, every carer's needs are different. Yes. Some people don't need to leave work at 3 o'clock most days, or some people every carer's needs are different, and
Absolutely.
so employers have to be flexible, and that's difficult for them.
Could I just ask if, when you made your request to your original employer about working part-time, whether you mentioned the statutory right to request flexible working, whether you were aware of that?
I didn't know there was a statutory right. The thing is, you don't think of yourself as a carer. I know might be one of your other questions, but you just don't think of yourself as a carer. You're just helping your parents out, or whoever out, your child, or you're just doing what's right, and you just don't think of yourself as a carer. And it's only months down the line, when you've been in and out of hospital and going to GP appointments and stuff like that, and something goes wrong with you, as it did with me, that you then think, well, hang on a second, I need some help.
Absolutely, thank you. And Nikki, hi. What's your experience?
I'm the mother of a beautiful 15-year-old girl who, at 7 months old, was diagnosed with profound disabilities. And at that point, you realise, someone once said to me that employment and disabled children are like oil and water. They just do not mix. And I have found this throughout the journey that we've taken with Antonia. I'm a fully qualified teacher, and I trained in 1996, and I worked full-time until Antonia was diagnosed. And then I had to give up my job because there just isn't the highly qualified specialist care available for me to work. So at that point, I became a statistic. I believe that only about 16% of women who have disabled children actually work, compared to about 61% of mothers who don't have disabled children. And of those of us who do manage to have a job, over 2/3 refrain from taking promotion or actually take demotion in order to balance caring and work. So my role as a carer within my school is well known, and my school colleagues and my head teacher is fantastic. But it's fairly obvious that teaching and caring don't go together. The school day starts at 8:30 and finishes at 3:30. Well, it doesn't actually finish at 3:30. Finishes about 7 o'clock at night. But it's just not possible without that extra support to cover your child in the morning or cover your child in the evening. You just can't work. So at the same time where you are mourning the aspirations and dreams you had for your child, you end up mourning your own aspirations and dreams that you've lost, because I don't now have the teaching career that I planned. I have a teaching job, and I teach for 2 days a week, which I'm passionate about. But the juggling is a really good word. In your question, when you say juggling, I am becoming an expert in special needs. I'm becoming an expert in legal things, in social services, in CAMS, in physio, in OT, all of these things, and that in itself is a full-time job. And it seems very strange, really, that whilst we are fighting so hard for integration, for children to becoming integrated fully into society and experience everything that all other children should experience, as parents we can't integrate in that way because we're not afforded the norm of having a job. And so I think the two things, I think there's a real issue for the amount of support available for parents of disabled children to work.
Sure.
Jack, just come in before we go on, Jack.
On our visit to Stoke-on-Trent, we met a number of teachers who had taken on caring responsibility, and they similarly described the very much difficulties that they faced in their profession because of the challenges that you've just described. They also mentioned about the fact that if they'd had to come out of teaching and then wanted to go back in, that it's very difficult. Have you faced those challenges because of the need to keep up your qualifications?
Exactly. I came out of teaching when Antonia was diagnosed, and I had to be out of teaching until she was about 3 or 4. I went back into a school as a teaching assistant for 5 hours a week because I knew that if I could keep my foot in the door. And fortunately for me, a member of staff went on jury service, which was extended, and they needed somebody to cover, and I was qualified, and that's how I got back in. It was just a lucky break to get back in. If I had come out for the amount of time that I had been out, to then try and get back in, it would have been very, very difficult. Supply is really your only route, and if you're a supply teacher, the work is not regular, and you can't plan for it, because you have to. Routine is absolutely what dictates our lives, routine. So supply teaching is just not an option. So yes, I totally agree with you. It's very, very difficult to get back in once you get out.
Nikki, can I just ask, in Wirral we've got a lot of children who are educated at home. Might your people in your position be a wonderful source and resource for the local authority to meet its needs in children being educated at home, because you could set a pattern when they came to you or you went to them? Would that be a possibility?
I think that depends very much on the individual and what your passion is for teaching and where your passion lies. My passion definitely lies within Key Stage 1 of a primary school in a buzzing class of 30 children where we are covering the entire curriculum. But I do have friends who work as teachers within hospitals, and that's a very specialist niche area and also highly rewarding. So I think it depends very much on the individual, and I'm sure there are lots of people within my profession who would. I know some of my friends who've gone into portage teaching, which is a highly individualised teaching programme for children with special educational needs, and that's done in the home. So yeah, I'm sure there's a huge bank of people that you could reach out to do that, but my passion lies within that.
Ruth?
Thank you. And Beth, and the same question to you about if you've tried to find work and what's your experience been of that?
Well, I care for my mother who was diagnosed with young onset dementia in 2017. I used to work as an in-store housekeeper for an outsourced company within Tesco. And within 7 months of my mother's diagnosis, it was a joint thing that I had to leave my job. Working on my caring responsibilities became too difficult to manage effectively, more for my employer than myself. When I told my employer about becoming a carer and the diagnosis, I just got blatantly told, okay, and my employer just walked off. She didn't tell me about the carers' rights, no information about how they could help or support or anything like that. Any leave that I had during my work was taken up with appointments, meetings, support groups, consultations, social worker visits, occupational therapists, and I have a list as big as my arm. It was decided at my work appraisal that it was obviously because my attendance record was so poor, and consequently the inference was to look after mum or give up work. They made the decision on my behalf and terminated my employment. After mum had diagnosis and I lost my job, about 6-7 months passed, and I applied for quite a number of jobs, and obviously because of the gap in my where the employment was and when I applied, I couldn't find anything because nobody would employ someone that had a gap of 6 months or so.
Can I ask if you let prospective employers know about your caring responsibilities?
Yes. When I have applied for certain jobs, I do say that I'm a carer. Obviously, with having carers allowance, I can only work so many hours. Yeah. So because of that, they choose someone else over myself. But even then, no one goes into the carer's rights or how they could support a carer or just things like that, really.
Do you think it's your gap in employment or the limit on your hours set by carer's allowance that are both, which is the worst of the detriments that future employers might look at in the work you're looking at?
I think it's both, really, because obviously the gap is a big thing. No one wants to, what have you been doing for the past 6 months sort of thing, because I'm 21, so what do you do when you're 21? But I think with my caring role, it could last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. No one can tell how long I'm going to be a carer for. So I think their main worry is that it could become one day, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, that I could say, right, I'm going to have to give up my job to care for my mum full-time because she needs 24-hour care. So,
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And Katie?
Hi, so I was caring for my mum who had vascular dementia, and I was in my first year of university. So her dementia developed pretty fastly, so she deteriorated very quickly. So that meant that I had to leave university in my first year and become my mum's full-time carer straight away. So I fell into that role very quickly and very fastly. So one of my main issues around that was how to get back into higher education. So a lot of my goals were career development and where I wanted to go from my career-wise. And obviously being 18 when I fell into that role, I didn't actually have a lot of work experience myself. So I found a lot of barriers with that. So trying to go from being in a 24/7 caring role, where to go from A to B to get to where I needed to be and to plan out my future. And I struggled finding information from services, and also I tried a lot of research on my own. But one of the key points is I never seen myself as a carer, so I wasn't looking in the right places, and also people weren't asking me the right questions to sort of elicit that out of me. So my main challenge was sort of trying to get back into some sort of work, but and ideally I wanted to get back into higher education. But like I say, having the 24/7 role was extremely difficult for me.
Absolutely, thank you all.
Very good. Andrew? Thank you.
I think we've heard today there's been a lot of different experiences in terms of accessing information. Do you think there's enough information for carers and for you to know where to turn to when you find yourselves in a caring role? And we'll work our way back, right to left to shake it up a bit. So, Katie.
Okay, so yeah, when I first fell into that role, I did go to the job centre and I went for carers allowance. And I think the main issues with that was there was not enough support. I did ask about higher education. I made it clear that what I was after was career development, because a lot of the time they were asking, you know, are you ready to work? And I wasn't, because I wasn't able to leave my mum because she depended on me so heavily. So my answer to that was an obvious no. But I did try and push forward to say that.
So, Katie, was there any help from within the university at all? Because we talk a lot about employers and employees, but you were obviously at university, not in a job. So was there any help available from the university you were?
Yeah, so from my university, when I went to university, they were extremely helpful. So I think the nature of university in itself is very flexible. So when I did apply for a job at the university, they were flexible to accommodate me in my hours. But getting the job in the university still provided some challenges, because when I went to the interview for the first time, I wasn't actually successful because I didn't have enough experience job-wise. I only had voluntary experience. But and in one sense, I was lucky because the person that they offered the job to didn't want it. And so that's how I felt to get that role. But once I did get that, they were very flexible around my caring role. But the only thing that I would state about that would be negative is that a lot of the time they would encourage me to take time off when I actually needed and wanted to work.
Right.
So my sort of solution to that was just to offer a more formal approach to flexibility around that, rather than just assuming that just because I'm a carer that I need all these different days off. I actually need to work.
Yeah, quite. Brereton?
My experience with the job centre obviously was with the carers allowance. It was just the routine questionnaire and filling in forms. Nobody mentioned any support for carers or such things like that, so it was just sort of you go in
was
and you come back out.
At the job centre?
Yes, yeah, that was at the job centre. Yeah, it was just you go in, you fill the forms in, and you wait for a reply. There was no is there anything we can do to support you? Is there any educational things that you want to do, or anything like that? It was just you go in and you come back out again.
And you obviously had a terrible experience with your employer. Do you think there was a lack of knowledge on their part? Do you think that was deliberate? Do you think they were deliberately not looking for help for you, or was it just, because they weren't informed as to where they should go themselves?
With my employer,
Yeah.
I think it was lack of knowledge.
Right.
Not many people know about young onset dementia.
Yeah.
Because my mother was diagnosed when she was 56. So I think they just brushed it off as an old person's disease. You sit in a chair in a care home, something like that. There was a lot of stigma around a young carer caring for someone that is still young and has dementia. So I think that was the problem that they had, and they just didn't know where to access information to help me from. That's what I think it was.
Okay. Nikki?
When we first discovered that Antonia had difficulties, 100% of the focus was in finding out what was wrong with her and chasing the diagnosis and looking at the prognosis. At no point in that time was there a consideration that this family might not be able to cope with what they've just been told, or how they're going to deal with it, or how they're going to cope with it. So there was actually no information other than what the health professionals were giving us about it could be this genetic deletion, it could be that difficulty. And so it was a long time. We were in a complete bubble with this child, working with the health professionals. We had no idea that there was potentially support and guidance that is legislated for families like ours. It just, that information, you would hope that in a situation where it's clear that a child is going to need 24/7 care for the rest of its life, there would be a big button that you would press that would reach out to social services and care networks, and they would come to you at that point and say, you know, you might not need us at this point, but you've been flagged up to us as someone who's going to need support in the future. That just doesn't happen. And it's through the network of wonderful people that you meet. If you are privileged to be in the world of special needs children and people who require care, the number of people that you meet are absolutely amazing and inspirational people, and that's where we get our information from. It's not coming from the local authority. And yet in the legislation it says that the local authority are supposed to make sure that you have this information and that you're not meant to go and ask for it. It should be coming to you. But I feel very much that it's a case of us having to prove that we need the support rather than then helping us to get it. And it depends very much on...
So the onus is on you?
The onus is on us. It's your level of tenacity, it's your the level of fatigue that you feel as a carer. You have to put that to one side because the people you're caring for only have you. And when you give up because you just don't have it in you anymore, that affects them, and then that affects your well-being, because we live with guilt and failure all the time. But we shouldn't have to, because as part of the becoming an expert in all the different things, when you become an expert in the field of all the legal things, what I feel that the local authorities do is they cherry pick the legislation that they can use. For example, I was entitled to a carer's assessment, but because Antonia is below the age of 18, the carer's assessment is purely a cathartic paper and pen activity. It's a chance for me to vent how difficult my life is. They are not duty-bound to provide any support for me through that carer's assessment because she's not yet 18. Now that could be interpreted as correct if you only look at the Carers Act, but if you look at everything else that's put in place for families with disabled children, everything leads to the best possible outcomes. And if the child in need assessment is done properly, my carer's assessment should feed through that, and my needs and my husband's needs and our other little girl's needs should all be considered in that. But basically the local authority, it's very much like, if we don't have to give it to you, we're not going to give it to you.
Before that, Nikki, could we just ask from Katie, go back again, were you offered a carer's assessment?
No, so not when I went to the job centre, so they didn't identify me as a carer, even though I was taking the carer's allowance, so nor did the sort of the staff there identify me as a carer. It wasn't until a lot later, and not from the job centre, that I was identified and offered that.
Brereton?
The same answer. I wasn't offered one through the job centre. I got offered one months later through a carers charity, and that was a piece of paper with a star on it. You said, how difficult is it, 1 to 10? Do you feel like you need support, 1 to 10? There wasn't one suited for my needs. It was just for everybody. From matter, it could be from your needs to your needs. It wasn't specific to how I felt. It was just, well, can you cope, and just general things like that. So.
Great, thank you. Andrew, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Olga, do you think there's enough information?
I never saw myself as a carer,
Yeah.
so I never looked for a carer's assessment.
Yeah.
I just looked as myself as somebody who was trying to help Dad and sort Dad out. And it was only about 4 months down the line when I just lived and breathed Dad and his appointments. As I said, my parents lived in Staffordshire, so I was spending a long time in Staffordshire. And it was only when I had to needed a flu jab because Dad was neutropenia. And so I had to have a flu jab, and I couldn't get. I wanted a free flu jab because I wasn't working, and I couldn't get one without paying for it. And then my GP said, "Well, but you're a carer." And
was that the first time anybody had said to you?
Yes.
And how many years had you been doing this?
No, not that long. It was about 4.5 months.
4.5 months, sorry.
4.5 months, and my GP said, "But you're a carer." And then came in, but then had to register as a carer. Well, who do you register as a carer with? And then I was going to register. I live in Wandsworth, but my parents live in Staffordshire. So Wandsworth wouldn't accept me because my parents lived in Staffordshire, and Staffordshire wouldn't accept me because I lived in Wandsworth. So eventually I registered in Wandsworth, not mentioning where my parents lived, and then I got a flu jab. And once I got a flu jab, and once I was registered as a carer, all sorts of goodies opened up then. I got a health assessment. I've never had a carer's assessment.
Still to this day?
Still to this day, I've never had a carer's assessment. I did apply for a carer's credit eventually. I looked on the internet because I wasn't earning. I didn't go near the job centre. I've been there before and it's horrendous. So I didn't go near the job centre. My sister was a teacher and she couldn't get time off work and everything. So I've forgotten what the question was. So you just don't realise you're a carer. And I was talking earlier on to Carers UK. I'm a member of the Twitterati, and I found Carers UK on Twitter, and that opened up more doors. It was fantastic. So
do you think it'd be helpful if there was a pan-England or a pan-UK?
No, well,
instead of having to register in Staffordshire.
Pandora's box all came out.
It wasn't Pandora's box, it was a goodie box.
But the one thing that didn't come out was to say that you could have a carer's assessment.
Yeah.
No, I know, because I never considered myself, even then I didn't really consider myself a carer. But who'd you go to a carer's assessment for? I wouldn't know now where I go. But the thing is, you don't recognise yourself as a carer. And I was talking to Carers UK earlier on, is that how do I, where would I have seen literature about being a carer? Even if I don't remember seeing any literature in Dad's cancer clinic about being a carer. But even if I had, would I recognise that was me? But my dad's GP saw me many times. I knew I was whizzing up and down the motorway or living in Staffordshire when I lived in London. So he knew I was caring for my dad. My dad's consultants knew I was caring for my dad, and knew about the whizzing up and down the motorway. My dad's nurses who were giving him chemo, his first chemo at the age of 92. Way to go, Dad. The social services knew that I was a carer and I was whizzing up and down the motorway. All of these people around me knew I was a carer, and yet not one of them came forward and said, "Do you need any help?" They're the people that know. I didn't know I was a carer, but they knew. Where were they?
Can we go back, Katie? Did you consider yourself as a carer?
No, I didn't consider myself as a carer until I got involved with Bernardo's young adult carers, and that's when I got offered my assessment. But I actually...
How did you get involved with Bernardo's young carers?
So my auntie called up because what was happening is I wanted to go to university, and we were trying every angle to sort of put support in place, and she searched on the internet and came across it that way, so I was referred by a family member.
Brereton?
I first thought I was a carer when everybody was going, "How are you doing?" things like that. And then the forms were coming through, "What's your job?" and things like that, and it was just put carer down. And then instead of being mother and daughter, you become patient and carer then. So that it breaks the bond of parents and things like that. Sorry, I completely forgot the question.
No, Nikki?
It was actually our GP. We'd moved from down south to up north to live near to my parents, and it was actually our GP who expressed real concern that we'd never had a carer's assessment because we'd never been offered a carer's assessment.
And how long was that?
I think we had a carer's assessment when Antonia was 13.
So you'd been caring for how long, Nikki? Then you've been
Well, she was diagnosed as having a profound disability at 7 months old.
7.
So she was 13, and I didn't know that we could have a carer's assessment.
And in that time, you would have seen multiple doctors.
Never offered to us,
Yeah,
no. And
yeah.
it was our GP who wrote to social services and said, my goodness, this family have not had a carer's assessment, and this is a serious oversight, and I want it addressed right away.
Right.
But going back to something that Beth has just said, is that it's really interesting, even in the questions that we were sent by the panel, and it talks about your role as a carer. I am never referred to in any of the documentation and assessments that we fill in, I'm never referred to as a mother. And Justin is not a father. We are now carers, and the title of carer comes before mother and father. And, you know, mother is one of the most coveted titles. It's something that, you know, many women want to have that title, and it is almost removed and becomes generic. And then what happens is, when you're looking after a disabled child, again, they can cherry pick that you are a carer for the purposes of this assessment, but when we want to give you some support, you're just a mother because it's a child. And as a mother, you'd be expected to look after your child. So, you know, you're either a carer and you're afforded the same rights as everybody when the children is 18 or whether they are younger, or you're a mother and you're expected to get on with it like all other admirable mothers do.
But Beth was making a slightly different point, wasn't she? But very similar, that, you know, people ceased to view her mother-daughter relationship, and it was carer-dependent relationship. Yeah. So back to you.
Can I just say that's one of the reasons why it's so good to have a job, because when you go into the playground and people say to you, "Hi, Mrs. Kimber," I'm not, "Hi, carer lady," carer lady with disabled child.
Yeah.
I have got an identity at school, and it's so important to me for my well-being.
That was the same with me with my dad. I just became my dad's carer, and in fact, eventually, that's how I saw myself. I completely lost my own identity. I was living with mum and dad. I was eating their food. I was doing the things that they wanted to do. I'd sort of given up my hobbies, and then my siblings started to help out so I could take up my hobbies. I completely lost myself. I didn't know who I was. That's why I had to go back to work for my insanity.
Yeah. Sorry, Liz, I feel like we've been ages since talking to you. So the information, do you think there's enough information out there?
Absolutely not.
No. Yeah.
So
and where did you
my
turn?
story is different to Louise. It's my husband that's disabled. As we talk, he's currently in a coma. He was diagnosed with MS in 2000. He went to a wheelchair 5 years ago, and to this day I've never had a carer's assessment. I've never been given any caring information. I think I resuscitated him 4 times last year, my children twice on their own. There's no help for them.
Would you know to ask for that carer's assessment?
I didn't hear about one until we joined a different MS support group last year, and it was through, they do a respite weekend, and it was only through the speakers there that I even heard that there was such a thing. And obviously since the year 2000 we've been, and everything that's happened last year, we've seen many a doctor and a hospital, occupational therapists, everybody. I asked them to get someone in to help the children. The Young Carers Clubs are 4 o'clock on a Monday. My children go to secondary school, they're not even out of school 4 o'clock on a Monday. The local carers groups meet 2 o'clock on a Friday. I'm at work. Like there's nothing for anybody anywhere. No, there's not enough information. Everything I found out for myself, just internet or through these support groups that we eventually found sort of last year.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm hearing so much about coincidence, and you Googled or you found somebody on Twitter or your auntie, or I'm kind of interested. I've heard a little bit about it, but not very much. Just where the job centre fit into all of this. It sounds, Olga, for example, it would never have occurred to you to go to the job centre.
I've been there before. It's horrendous.
Yeah, you were so also in your dad's world.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in any of you that thought that was the right place to go, and what support you got when you got there, and whether it was the right kind of support. Just how big a feature in your very stressful lives has the job centre been, and kind of when? Should we start with Katie?
So yeah, I went to the job centre straight away and applied for carers allowance again because I thought that was the right thing to do.
How did you know to do that?
My dad told me.
Right. Okay.
He said because I wasn't working or having any employment that was available to me, so that's why I kind of went off his guidance. And when I got there, I don't think I really got any useful information from them. Like I stated previously.
How long ago was it? I'm trying, because the job centres are changing quite a bit as well, so I'm interested in that eyebrow Olga never play poker. I'm interested to know when it was, and if you knew whether the job centre that you went to was on universal credit, because you probably heard this is the big new benefit system that's coming in that should be changing how job centres operate. So it would help me if we had some context about when and how your job centre was operating.
Okay, so it was 2013 to 2015 was the period that I was with them. I'm not 100% sure about the universal credit thing. So when I went there wasn't, they didn't offer me relevant information about higher education because that's what I was pushing them to do. They introduced me to local solutions. They give me a leaflet, which is like an adult caring centre in Liverpool. But I actually didn't know that that's what it was because they didn't really explain that to me. And again, I wasn't explained to that I was a carer and that there was lots of benefits and things that I was able to access. And then I found that the visits got less frequent, and I didn't find that helpful.
So it's literally just about carers allowance, sign you on, and that sort, and have a leaflet.
Yeah, and they did ask me about my career development and where I wanted to go, but they kind of just logged it in, and then it was never really readdressed.
Okay, what about you, Bethan?
My experience with the job centre was, like I said before, just go in, fill in the forms, and come back out again. I had one appointment with them. I haven't seen them since 2016.
Okay, and do you know whether your job centre had universal credit or...?
Yes, they did at the time, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you went in, filled in the paperwork.
Filled in paperwork, signed a document, and they said, right, that's it, okay, thank you very much. And that was it. There was no leaflets, booklets, normal paperwork that you should get and say, right, would you like any support? There was none of that. It was, right, thank you very much, goodbye.
So that triggered you receiving a carer's allowance, filling in that paperwork, and that was the end of it?
Yeah, and that was it. And that's when I think that's when I initially thought, right, okay, I am a carer now.
Okay.
So,
what about you, Nikki?
Well, my experience was back in about 2004, 2005, and I think it was very novel that somebody may have been a carer. The jobs were very black and white. It was, these are the hours, this is what's available. If you can't do those hours, don't apply for that job. I also, at that point, because of the physiotherapists that did Riding for Disabled, had suggested that I apply for carers allowance. So I had the carers allowance, and then I walked across the road to the local primary school to see if I could volunteer.
So the carers allowance, that was triggered, that was from you going into the job centre, presumably?
Yes, because the physiotherapist at the Riding explained to me, this is what you need to do. So I got the carers allowance, and then I walked into the primary school to volunteer, and then there happened to be a teaching assistant post for 5 hours a week, which didn't take me over the threshold.
So that was just your own endeavours trying to find a role?
Yeah.
We're looking at the job centre, so that was the limit.
That was the limit of that, yeah.
So no assistance to help you, it was just, here are some jobs.
And if you can't do those hours, don't apply for that job.
And Olga?
Olga, loving the job centre as you do?
Yeah, no, I worked all my life, but I had 2 periods of unemployment for 6 months each time, and I was a managing director, and the guy who filled in my forms couldn't even spell managing director, and you know they didn't have such jobs. So this time I didn't go to them. I didn't see how they could help me because I was up in Staffordshire, and if you've got to sign on every 2 weeks, which I presumed I would have to do, and say I was looking for a job, which I wasn't, because I was looking after my dad, I just didn't see in what shape or form the job centre could help.
So you didn't bother at all?
I just didn't bother at all. And any research about carers allowance or carers credit, I did myself on Google.
Right. Okay. Because that's interesting for evidence for us, because the job centre is changing, but it tells me there's a comms issue there and a perception issue there, that you remember the job centre as it was.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have occurred to you to go.
No,
okay,
not at
Liz.
Because my husband's 43 and because I work, we're not entitled to anything. There's a lot of help for elderly people, there's a lot of help for under 18s, or more so than that middle ground. Because I work, we're not allowed to claim anything. There's no reason to go to a job centre. We wasn't even entitled to a disabled facility grant when we had to adapt our house. So we had to increase the mortgage by 70,000, which is obviously all on my shoulders. So I have to work. I have no choice. I would love to drop my hours, go to part-time, but I have no choice because obviously I've got the original mortgage and that. And I'm not 20 years old. I can't get a 30-year mortgage, so it's over quite a short time. So it's a big monthly payment. And we get no assistance, no help.
And the grant that could have paid for the adaptations in your house, who was it you were talking to about that?
I've had quite a few arguments with the local council. I went to our MP. I confronted him on one of these library things. I went through all the different departments of social service. It's about a 6-month thing. And when they means test in my area, I think it was for a family of 4 with a disabled person, not children, it's 20 grand before tax. Obviously, hardly anyone qualifies. So we didn't qualify for the disabled grant, so I had to get £70,000 added to my mortgage.
So you just battled on your own?
You had to. You have no option. My husband lived in our front room for 3 years with a commode, and I had to wash it for 3 years till we adapted the house and got the funds.
All right, that's really informative, Jill. Thank you very much. And I think the business about your own identity that ought to be running alongside the double identity you have as carers as well. I think we've got on board. Huge thanks to all of you for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm an independent policy researcher based at the Institute of Employment Studies.
Right, I don't know what's happened to the mic or your voice, but might you speak up?
Yes, of course.
Really good. Chris? No, we got that, Sally.
Oh, you got
Thanks.
that, okay.
It's just we do want to hear your answers as well.
Thank you, Chair. Sally, did the Carers and Employment project, which operated over a 2-year period, did it achieve finding out what actually works in supporting carers to remain or return to employment? And if so, what did work?
I think it worked in finding out what works to help carers feel supported who work. I think that if we're talking about changing labour market outcomes for carers, so helping carers remain in work who otherwise might have left, or helping carers not in work into work, we didn't find evidence that it was successful in doing that.
Okay, and is that because of is that because some sectors of the economy where there's late notice shift changes, for example, which appears regularly in social care and other places, is that one of the reasons? Is it going to take changes to employment law to help care?
I think that one of the reasons that it was difficult for us as evaluators to see actual change was because the pilot was for 2 years and we had less than 2 years to look at any change in status of the carers that we talked to. So, and it can take time for somebody's labour market status to change. I suppose. Sorry, can you say your question again?
Well, I was just wondering if you were saying that there was not enough evidence of this project helping carers into work. Is that because there's maybe employment law barriers or other employment law solutions maybe to help carers?
I think this happened partly because carers were supported, and the carers we spoke to felt supported. They felt through the projects they were given more information than they'd had previously about the support that was available to carers. Not all of them, as a result of receiving that support and information, decided, for example, to step up their hours or stay in work. When I say it was successful in helping people feel supported, they felt that they had more practical support. They knew more about the finance, the benefits options available to them. they felt some of them more empowered or supported to ask for flexible working. So I think it was more about that when you give carers more information, they don't necessarily make a decision to work more.
Was that the main decision, really, of your work, Sally?
I think that because of the way that the projects were run across the country, they were all very different. Right. So they all delivered a different kind of cluster of activities and interventions. Our numerical information about carers was provided by each of the sites that delivered the services across the country. So as evaluators, we knew how many carers they said that they had reached. And because it was a qualitative study, we did speak to carers. And of the carers that we did speak to, they did feel supported. But as far as we were aware, none of them stepped up their hours or were doing more work than they were doing previously. It may well have helped their attachment to the labour market for some of them. In the long term, that might play out as retaining them.
Let's leave it there because Steve's going to come in with the labour market. Steve?
Yes, morning. I really wanted to ask, if I've understood it correctly, the evaluation report shows quite a number of useful soft outcomes from the pilot, but virtually no impact on the labour market outcomes. And I wondered why you thought that was the case.
I think, as a result of what I said before, I think that carers were supported in the sense that, for example, if an advisor was allocated to them to provide them with advice, moral support, I think they felt as a result of that their well-being improved and their ability to cope, their ability to balance care with work improved. Those that were in work sometimes made a decision that for them work wasn't the right thing at that point. So, for example, some of them wouldn't have known about their allowance, they wouldn't have known about their welfare entitlements. So there were some changes that resulted in carers perhaps temporarily dropping out of the labour market, reducing their hours, or working the same hours because they had felt more empowered or had the knowledge that they were able to ask their employer if they could work flexibly.
Would it be fair to say that if the government's aim was to help carers in terms of employment, the pilots were a failure in that respect?
I think that the pilots were all doing very different things. I think that from the perspective of the people working hard to deliver them, they were a success because they felt that carers were becoming aware of all the information that the people we've just listened to lacked. And they were able to reach employers who knew very little about how to support carers. So, as you say, in terms of soft outcomes, it was success. And I think that as an evaluator, we take a broad view of what success is. But yes, not in the strictest respect that you're referring to.
Okay, thank you.
Can you tell us, when you say advisors, in the sample there were people who acted as advisors. Who were these, Sally, these advisors?
The different projects around the country were predominantly led by local authorities or specialist agencies and partners working with local authorities. So they were all people who were, for example, working for some sort of carer support role as a professional. So they understood caring and carers. So when I say advisor, I mean somebody who was staffed by the project money, their salary was paid for by that, who were doing various sorts of outreach to reach carers. And then if their particular model allowed that, they might be working for a sustained period with a carer to support them periodically.
How did you pick the carers? Because we went up to Stoke and had a lovely group of carers, large group, but none of them had heard of the project. Was it meant only to be a very selected few within an area, Sally, or what?
I think that all of the areas struggled to reach carers. They know the carers are out there, but again, as we've just heard, some people don't really identify with the role carer.
But it didn't work. That wasn't. I mean, was it 40 carers? turned up for our meeting in Stoke, somebody managed to get hold of them. They all came along and were very, very active in lobbying us, saying what they thought, which is absolutely right. But none of them had heard of the project.
I think,
so one group was well able to give us a hall full of very attentive and careful carers about getting over their message about what they wanted a group of MPs to hear, but they'd not heard of the project, so that was a puzzle to us.
Well, I don't think the marketing activities across the 9 different areas were necessarily always successful in reaching every carer or every type of carer. So, for example, I think some successful approaches were about engaging with people in GP surgeries or in A&E departments, so they could catch carers, if you like, at crisis point. Or some carers were reached via the places of employment. So there were very different ways that that the various providers would try and reach out to carers, but they had different methods, and obviously they weren't always successful in alerting every carer who might have been eligible for support.
All right, great. Alex?
Thanks very much, Frank. Sally, having looked at all of these pilots, did you say there were 19?
9.
Sorry, 9. 9 different pilots. What? Thinking of them individually rather than one group as initially, what were the sort of standout lessons from individual cases that have stuck with you that ought not to be forgotten?
I would say that what was more successful from the perspective of carers were approaches that involved one-to-one contact rather than just passively receiving information, advice and guidance that was generic. So I think tailored support that meant they saw somebody who understood caring, the demands of caring, a person they saw on a repeated basis, built up a relationship with, could establish trust with. So that would be the key lesson. It would be the more intensive forms of support that were most successful.
And what was the experience of the pilot's interaction with employers, or different pilots' interaction with different employers?
It was interesting because it varied tremendously, and obviously, as you might expect, some employers were more ready to engage than others. Those sites that worked with employers, again, it could be a bit hit and miss in terms of reaching them. Some of them used local networks to reach employers like chambers of commerce, things like that. Some relied more on cold calling. Their experience was that some employers were ready to engage and quite warm already, and that some employers weren't interested and did not engage. And I think, as you might expect, there was a bit of sort of picking low-hanging fruit in that those who were ready to engage were the ones that they worked with. So it was a mixed experience.
And of these...
Can I just, Alex, on that? When we were in Jack's area, looking at and talking to people, part of the pilot, the only employers that were mentioned were employers in the public sector. I mean, Jack's local authority and the county council in Staffordshire was good. When we had an employers forum, there were some charities, but we didn't actually have private sector employments. Was that general, Sally, of the results?
No, that wasn't. It wasn't the case that there were no public sector employers, and some that stand out for me, some of the supermarkets who were very ready to engage and had a lot of people working for them in the working carers cohort. So no, there were examples of private companies.
But if I heard it right, Bethan said that she worked for Tesco's.
Okay, that would make sense. Yeah.
Was
She
it
worked
right?
for an outsourced company.
Oh, outsourced what you were supplying, yes.
Yeah.
Well, she got the cold shoulder.
Okay.
It wouldn't have been Tesco.
No, it wasn't
Okay.
Tesco's. Apologies to Tesco's.
Okay.
Well, they've got enough on their hands today without me leading. All right.
Could I ask?
Yeah. Can I? But do you want to add anything to that about the sort of numbers, the balance between public, charitable, the third sector, and private employers? So how did it sort of spread out?
We were given information from each of the sites about the numbers of employers they reach, so we are not able to be specific about the proportions.
No.
I would say that it does make sense to me that a lot of them would be public sector because of the nature of jobs that predominantly women in the age groups that a lot of carers are often work in teaching and health and social care and in public sector environments. So I think that what would happen with some of the pilots is they would approach employers who they thought would be receptive, and often the ones that would be the most receptive would employ people meeting certain demographic criteria. I think that, and often as well, they would go for some of the larger employers with hope of making the biggest impact, and a lot of those areas were largest employers for hospitals and county councils.
Alex, may Ruth come in before I come back to you? Yes.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Sally, there's very structural reasons in employment law and in benefits which make it more difficult for carers to work on top of their caring responsibilities in the threshold for carers allowance, lack of day one right to request flexible working or carers leave. Do you think that any relaxation of those rules would assist carers that you were looking at to be able to increase their hours of work or get back into the labour market?
I think
those a factor?
I think there's an appetite amongst all working carers to work as flexibly as they possibly can, and what they want is employers to be willing and open to that. Some carers didn't know that they had the right to request, and once they did and were supported to do that, many of them found that they could. So some of it is about increasing awareness. Also, some of it is about employers obviously being persuaded that it's good to offer this to carers.
Thank you. Alex? All right. Sally, huge thanks.
Thank you.
It's interesting to meet one of the faces behind the project after our visit to Stoke, so thank you very, very much for coming in. Thank you very much for coming in. Sarah, might you identify yourself and the team with you, please?
Yes, I'm Sarah Newton, Member of Parliament for Truro and Falmouth and Minister for Disabled People, Health and Work in the Department for Work and Pensions. And this is Andrew and Duncan, who are both part of the policy leadership team in the department that support in this policy area.
Brilliant. Andrew?
Morning, Minister. In the written evidence to the committee, the DWP said that all employees are entitled to 28 days of paid annual leave. These days can be used by carers to meet their caring responsibilities. Do you think it's fair that carers have to use their annual leave to fulfil their caring responsibilities?
It's not the only thing that I said in that evidence, and as we've heard, I was very proud that it was our government since 2010 that brought in the ability for carers to ask for flexible working. I think that's incredibly important. And as was set out in the ambition of the piece of work that the Prime Minister asked Matthew Taylor to undertake, which I think will be reporting quite imminently, and we want to make sure that we have a workplace that meets the needs of the current population, so full of working lives, the responsibilities of women towards caring. We absolutely need to be constantly thinking about what more we can do to enable people to be able to participate in the workplace but balance their caring responsibilities. So I'm sure that there'll be more that we'll be looking at in the future that we can support people to care and work.
Yeah, I think it was the Conservative manifesto last year that committed to introducing a statutory entitlement to carers leave. So I just wondered when we could expect to see this on the statute book.
Yeah, I mean it's an absolute commitment.
Yeah.
Across government, there's a lot of work going on at the moment, and the Department for Health really lead in this policy area, but it needs all parts of government to work together. So ourselves are involved, BEIS are involved. The department will be setting out a carers action plan in the next few months. But I also see the development of the Green Paper on the future of care, both for working age people but also for older people, as a really great opportunity to feedback from this committee's work, other work that the department's been doing, to ensure that we're doing everything possible to support people with caring responsibilities and to enable them to balance that with working responsibilities, at the appropriate stage in their lives.
Can I ask, I know this is going off track slightly, for your reaction, you sat through the evidence session, obviously we heard some pretty horrific stories from Beth working for the outsourcing company. Your reaction as the Minister?
Yeah, unfortunately, because of where I was sitting, I couldn't see any of the names, so I'd really like to give quite a personal response to it, but unfortunately I can't. But it was really excellent that they came today. Very brave thing to do, to come and share in such a public forum their personal experiences. So I really welcome the opportunity to listen to them. And it just shows how much more we've all got to do to prevent those things from happening and overcoming, the barriers. A, to providing the support they so richly need, and B, the support to combine their caring responsibilities with employment. And we had that very well articulated, the importance for the individual, their sense of identity, their sense of worth, their well-being, while they're combining it with their caring responsibilities. Because in my job, every day I meet with carers, every day I'm listening to experiences, and this is informing the work that we're doing to across government to improve services and to improve the outcome for people.
Do you think that DWP and government as a whole should be encouraging employees to go out of their way to help carers more than they are right now, find the help that they need?
I think it's really important. Both public sector and private sector employers do everything they can. So, we heard some dreadful examples today, but of course in your evidence you've received some really good examples of organisations that are doing a lot and have carers policies and are signed up to and actually implement a huge amount of positive.
It's the luck of the draw, though, isn't it? Some are great, some aren't so good. It's the same. Yeah.
And I think what we have to do is to make sure that we're making sure that every employer understands the benefits to them of enabling flexible working and the support that's required for carers, and at the same time ensuring that it's consistent right across the country.
Sarah, you're almost exceptional amongst ministers who come and sit in the whole session before they actually answer questions. So next time you come, please come and sit on our table with us so you can actually see people's names.
That's very generous.
No, not at all. But might I just take you back to what a question that Andrew asked. Andrew said there's this in the Tory party manifesto.
Yes.
You said there were all sorts of pathways leading to that.
Yeah.
But Andrew asked you, when could we expect you to fulfil the commitment in the manifesto? When do you think that will be, Sarah?
I honestly do not know the actual date we're going to bring that forward, but it's a very clear commitment. I can see that with the work that we will be bringing forward this year, that there'll be opportunities to do that. But whether it is going to be this year or not, I don't know. There'll be a huge amount of public consultation following the government's response to the Taylor review. There'll be a huge amount of public consultation on proposals on the future of adult social care for working age people and for older people. There'll be a huge amount of hard work is going on now, which you will soon see the fruits of in consultations on what we're going to bring forward in terms of legislation.
We proposed a bill to the government, and one way of hurrying this along, Sarah, would be if you could take back to government, we would love the opportunity to introduce that bill. And you could attach some other things to it. It's all part of that Taylor review.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I think when the response is published to the Taylor review, it's going to have a response to your select committee proposals.
It is,
I will very much be looking forward to listening and reading your proposals following this inquiry. And as I said, there's going to be various opportunities this year for us to be able to take these ideas forward into legislation.
Brilliant. Quick one from Heidi, then to Jack.
Yeah, just here to help drafting the legislation, so you don't need to. That's the select committee's approach these days. Always here to help. Just a broad question, really. What we heard so much of today, and it's true in a lot of life, it's the good people that look out for the people and make sure the right things happen. Good manager, bad manager. Do you accept that there will need to be potentially a bit of a stick, and that's what the statute might need to be there for, because some employers just aren't going to play this game otherwise.
You're absolutely right, and I'm very proud of the fact that we're very committed to advancing rights for workers. We want everybody in our country to have good employment, and all employers to have good employment practices. And we've shown our commitment in a range of measures we've already brought in, as well as firm commitments in our manifesto and elsewhere to further advance the rights of workers. And I do think, while one would hope that employers would voluntarily do the right thing by their employees, that doesn't always happen, and that's when we have to legislate.
Okay, thank you.
Jack, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is particularly about flexible working, and as we've heard from a number of carers, flexible working is really important in many cases to allow them to stay in employment. But we've also heard from employers that there's huge variability between what some employers offer and others don't offer, as the case may be. So what are your views in terms of that statutory right to request flexible working? At the moment it's after 26 weeks. Do you think that should be improved?
First of all, I'd say that, personally I've benefited from flexible working, like lots of women who've combined having children with work. We can learn a lot of lessons from the big journey that we've been on in terms of both good practice and legislation around enabling women to combine childcare with employment, facing the huge challenge that we do of an ageing population. I think we need that huge culture change now to look at how we combine enabling people to care. It is often women, but it's men as well, for an ageing population. And so I would have the same focus as we have on childcare as elder care. Other countries use that term. We don't tend to use that term in this country. But also to be very mindful of the very powerful testimony we heard from a mum today about caring for a disabled child. And that responsibility is going to be continuing from childhood into adulthood. So these are big culture changes that we need to bring about. And of course, legislation has an important role in that. I mean, historically, the rights of workers have been accumulated by time, so that there's usually this presumption that you have to be employed for a particular period of time before you acquire particular rights. But I think that's one of the aspects of the Matthew Taylor review, was looking at should certain rights like sick pay and others be acquired from day one. So the Prime Minister very clearly signalled her intention to improve the condition for all workers in our country by asking for independent review of how we can do that across a range of workers' rights. Accepting that, as Matthew Taylor did in his report, that we have to balance out workers' rights with employment opportunities. So we don't want to create a situation where the obligations on employers are so demanding that it will stifle employment. So I think there has to be a sensible balance there of good employment protection, but in a way that enables businesses to employ people.
So when we had Aviva giving evidence to our committee, they suggested that they are now going to offer all of their new jobs in the future to be flexible. Do you think all employers should be offering job adverts as being flexible if possible?
I absolutely think so, for their own benefit. We've got almost full employment in large parts of our country today, and I really want employers to be prepared to look at a whole range of people that would love to work, that are currently excluded from the workplace, whether that's people with disabilities or people with caring responsibilities, or people who are perhaps recovering from substance misuse, or people leaving prison. I would love them to take a look at a huge pool of talent in our country that, with the right support, can play their full part in society, which includes work.
Sarah, can I just make one comment on that, your replies to Jack? Nikki, in the first evidence, talked about being a mother of a child with disabilities, and it was a very different journey than other mothers with children who were expecting their children to actually, and maybe dreading it, leaving the nest, so to speak. For those for many of those who are not caring for children, you know you're caring for somebody, the end result's going to be death. So there is, in a sense, the status between somebody who's caring for people in that position, loved ones, it is a different task from actually knowing that the end product is not going to be the success of the child moving into adulthood and their own careers, their own lives, their own loves and so on. I just wanted you to bear that in mind when you were thinking. There was a comparison. We've learned a lot from women with children being flexible and how they manage care. It's just another load on you if you're actually caring for somebody who you know the end result is not life, but actually death.
I completely agree with what you say, and I'm glad for this opportunity to clarify what I was meaning. It was just I wanted to say that I think we put a lot of focus in society on enabling women to care for children and to work, and I think we need to put equal focus on enabling people to care for disabled children or disabled adults or older people, that caring responsibility needs to be seen as importantly by society as caring for children. And I mean, it doesn't always fall on women. I mean, men are carers too. But I am that generation of women who both have children and older family members to care for, and this is predominantly an issue that most any woman at my age and situation can personally identify with. Sure. Are the challenges of wanting to be yourself, reach your own potential, as so well described by the lady sitting at the table today, but also taking our very personal responsibilities towards the loved ones in our family, whatever their ages, very seriously.
Steve? And then,
I just wanted to ask, I mean, I'm sure people hearing this or reading the transcript will be very pleased to hear that you say you wish employers to be more accommodating. But, you're a government minister. What they want to hear is that you're going to take some decisive action to make them be more accommodating. Isn't that what the committee needs to hear today?
Well, I'm pleased it was this government in coalition that actually brought in these rights.
No, but I'm talking about your wish list now. I'm saying, don't we need to hear you say that there are decisive steps coming now?
I think that what I've heard from the ladies at the table this morning, and I'm sure you've heard in your evidence, is overwhelming, that people do not even know what their rights are today, and that companies are not fully implementing their rights. So I think there's a big job we've got to do in terms of making sure people understand. Right. Yeah, and I want to come on to that point. Not understanding this, and I'm making sure that there is proper enforcement of the existing legislation. I mean, that's obviously going to come clearly out of your report. And then, of course, we'll be looking to see what more we can do to take action in legislation, which I've said. Now, I'd like to answer the question about the job centre. Of course, that was really disappointing, hearing people's very negative attitudes towards the job centre, people saying they would never even go there. And then when somebody did go to the job centre, not having as good an experience as I would like them to have. Can I just say, though, that in the where we've got the full rollout of universal credit, if people are needing benefits above and beyond carers allowance, then the work coaches that they'll be working with have had really good training in terms of identifying carers and being able to signpost to local support. In the job centres, there'll be community partners who will be from carers organisations, people with lived experience of carers, so that the sort of service that I'm sure you and I would both like to see as somebody who is both combining wanting to work or increasing their hours with caring will get somebody in front of them, a work coach in front of them, that has empathy and knowledge of what they're facing and will be able to signpost them to support. Now, if somebody is going to a job centre today, even in a universal credit, a full rollout area, and they are just asking to complete the forms for carers allowance, and they're not looking for any other benefit, clearly they will not get access to the work coach. And that's something that I heard very clear from one of the ladies, I think the lady here who's 21, and I'm taking that away because I can quite understand how that happens, because of the administration of carers allowance is done by the pension service, so really the job centre in that situation is a place to go to fill your forms in, not getting access to the work coaches. And it's the work coaches and our investments in work coaches and their training and the community partners and services which enable people to get access to that service. So we need to take that away so that when that person comes into the job centre to fill in that form, we can improve communications and referrals into other services which they may benefit from.
There are bound to be carers watching this, Sarah, so you'd be really pleased if carers wrote into the committee to give to you examples where it still isn't working as you want it to work.
Always. I'm always delighted to receive direct contact from citizens who are experiencing the benefits system, but also I work very closely with Carers UK and a number of organisations that spend time explaining the situation to me.
Jack wants a quick point then. Sorry, it's Ruth. Jack?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the point around those flexibilities and the fact that many carers don't know what they're entitled to. As you mentioned, we've heard that today, but also during the visits that we had to speak to carers in Stoke-on-Trent, there was a number of carers who didn't know what they were fully entitled to. You've mentioned about the need for a cultural change. How do you see, when we've got such significant changes that need to happen, that cultural change happening?
I think it's not going to be a single bullet. I mean, this is a whole, all the different government departments need to pick up this challenge. We heard that it was often a GP that identified a carer for the first time. I've participated, like I'm sure all MPs have, working with their local carers organisation during Carers' Right Weeks. I've stood in the reception area to my local hospital. I've been down in the town centres trying to engage people to get them to identify themselves as carers. That's the number one challenge we all face. And then being able to signpost them to support that's available. So GPs have clearly got an important role to play. Teachers, social services, the job centre. This requires a whole new strategy across government, which is what the Department for Health are leading on, and I'm very confident when they publish their Carers Action Plan, which is due in a matter of months, we'll see these issues addressed.
Very good. Ruth?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And obviously you heard from the carers this morning that some of them saw the earnings threshold on carers allowances limiting the work they could do or being able to move into work at all. Are you prepared to consider a tapering on that threshold, because it's very much a solid cliff edge and work disincentive at the moment?
Well, Ruth, I absolutely agree with you that it is a barrier, and that's why we've been increasing it, and we're committed to increasing it this year. And there are a lot of disallowances, things that, all sorts of expenses that you can incur which don't go towards that cap.
But many people don't know about those expense allowances.
Yeah.
I mean, the carer's expenses allowance for a paid carer is not even on the Gov.uk website.
Well, I think if there's any evidence of things not being on the Gov.uk website, I'll be very pleased to hear it. When I looked at the information that's available to the work coaches who would be supporting people in employment and to increase their hours. I mean, there's pages and pages and all different sections of really good advice for the work coaches.
But Sarah, the cap is so low, isn't it? All of us are lucky MPs who've got salaries. We could take out the carer's allowance and hardly notice that we're spending it. And can I just bring you back? I mean, it's great the government's trying to lift the threshold. I think I speak for the whole committee, we'd love you to do that much more radically, but also Ruth's point about preventing cliff edges, to actually have it then phased out.
I mean, I think it's a really good idea because it's the whole premise of universal credit, that work always pays, and that's the whole, rationale behind UC, and something I very, very much support, that work should always pay. And that for every hour that people work, they should always be better off. So I do think it's well worthy of consideration as we roll out universal credit. But I do want to be very reassuring, because I'm sure people from Carers UK and others will be listening to this, that the recognition of carers' allowance as to being outside the benefits cap is really, really important. So for those people who are listening thinking, oh my goodness, maybe we're signalling that we're not going to be doing that in the future, we are very committed to making sure that it is outside of the benefit cap.
Right. Because it's a very low level of benefit. Obviously at the moment £62.70 for 35 hours a week of care, which is a very low weekly rate for the role that so many carers do. It is far more than 35 hours a week.
I appreciate that, Ruth, and every year we're committed to increasing it, and we are increasing it. So, but of course, I'd like to see
it's going up a small amount, but still nowhere near the sort of minimum wage type levels for actually doing the care. You mentioned about universal credit and tapering under that, but there's many carers who won't qualify for universal credit. So is it something that you will also look to do outside of that system? Because £120 a week, the proposed threshold plus of earnings plus your carers allowance still is a poverty trap essentially, and that's the maximum people will be able to get.
Yeah. Look, I'm very aware that I've got my colleague Duncan and Andrew here who haven't had a chance to come in here. And of course
but this is a policy area, so we'd love to hear them talk on that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think given that they're so knowledgeable and we're about how we feel that we're supporting carers better within universal credit, and that's very much our intention, to support carers better in universal credit. I think it's a good opportunity to hear a bit from
Before that, Sarah, Jack, does yours relate to universal credit?
Slightly different.
Oh no, fine. Very good, Andrew.
So can I say then, thank you for inviting me first of all, and can I say two things about carers allowance and the taper point, because we have looked at this. So first of all, to be clear about carers allowance, it was introduced in 1976. It hasn't been changed very much since, and the earnings, I think the last benefit we have that has a kind of negative test of earnings. So you have to prove to us that you're not earning too much to get it. Like caricature.
Go over £100, they have to prove every week what they're earning.
And this reflects the circumstances in which it was introduced in 1976. So it's something we do need to look at. So the earnings rule in carers allowance serves a different purpose from the one in universal credit. But I hear what you're saying. There was a technical point now about just tapering, if I might be a little bit technical. If you wanted a cost-neutral way of doing that, then there would be bits of government that would be quite keen on that. The taper would have to kick in at a really low level. So we'd need to look at how that would work. If you wanted the taper to kick in at the current starting point where the earnings limit is, then obviously that would have a cost attached to it. So we'd need to balance those things.
One would hope that departments would look at balancing the positive impacts of carers being able to increase their hours of work against the financial cost of doing so.
I'm sure that's right.
At the moment, carers allowance has always been set at just below the limit of 16 hours at the national minimum wage, so no one's able to claim working tax credit at the same time as carers allowance, and that's a big limit as well. Is that something that the department might be prepared to look at, because it wouldn't take much to take it above that?
I think intrinsically, the replacement of tax credit, working tax credit, with universal credit looks at that to some extent. So carers allowance and universal credit will be, you will be able to claim them concurrently, and you will be able to therefore claim carers allowance and the in-work version of universal credit. I think there's a message. I mean, I take your point about the full economic case. So simply looking at the benefit effects, or the AMI effects of doing particular things in carers allowance doesn't give you the full picture, because you'd need to look again at it feeds into the employer point as well, about productivity for employers. So the case to make to employers that says actually it's in your interest as labour supply contracts, the ages, it's in your interest to do this, we just need to nudge you along a little bit. We need to take that kind of thing into account in making a business case for looking at how we might change those sorts of rules in carers allowance.
Duncan, have you a more hopeful message for us?
I'm afraid not. In fact, carers allowance is definitely part of Andrew's policy, so I would not want to trespass.
Can I just say, though, in terms of that, you asked the broader policy question, so now we've looked at the detail of how it's functioning now. That's absolutely, Ruth, what I want to do. I do not want there to be disincentives in the system both for employers or employees. And as I said, we're looking very carefully at, we've got a green paper on the future of adult social care, and the role that informal carers play within providing care to society is absolutely critical. So there is plenty of opportunity and appetite to look again at what more we can do to support carers in their caring responsibilities, but also to combine that with employment.
Thank you. Jack, last question.
We've touched on the issues around current income, which are extremely important for those carers. But I wanted to just ask about the longer term impact on individuals' finances, particularly around savings and pensions contributions. If individuals have to come out of work for caring responsibilities, that has a huge impact on their future savings and pensions contributions. What are you looking at in terms of those issues to try and improve the situation for those carers?
Well, I'm going to get Andrew to give you the in detail technical answer, but that was something that the government absolutely recognised and brought in NC3 national insurance contributions, so that people, it tends to be women but not always women, who do take time out of work to care are not disadvantaged, that they can acquire their national insurance contributions, they can get the full state pension. But Andrew will explain in detail, or Duncan might explain in detail how we do that.
Well, I can certainly talk about the state pension side of things. So I think we have the carers credit. I think we've got about 14,000 people on that. I should explain that that is essentially a closing a loophole. We've got a very wide range of credits available. Most means-tested benefits provide a national insurance credit. So I think as far as the state pension is concerned, we've got pretty good coverage of the overall carer population.
Could I just ask, I find that quite surprising. Did you say 40,000 people?
14.
Yeah. But there's over 800,000 people claim carers allowance. And
about 1.2 million.
Their earnings will be too low to pay national insurance.
That's true, but if they're claiming any other DWP benefit that's pretty much any other DWP benefit that's means tested, they will already be catered for. So as I said, this is a loophole plugger. It's not a means of providing all carers with a mechanism.
The figures that we have here suggest that has failed to reach 97% of that target group.
I don't think 97% of carers are without national insurance cover. In fact, I think when we look at the number of people we know who provide some sort of care, it's about 4.9 million. Were that to be the case, that would show through in our wider figures about state pension coverage, and it doesn't.
Can I, on that, Nikki, are you covered? Sorry? On the national insurance credits?
No, because I pay them myself because I work.
Right.
I work 2 days a week.
Right. Bethan?
Not that I know of, no.
Right.
If you tell me afterwards which benefits you draw, I can
No, Duncan, we'd love to hear. Right, well, might you actually check that? Because I can't believe those figures are adequate.
We can certainly provide you with all the different benefits that provide a national insurance cover.
Yes, if you could, is it possible for you to give us your estimate, Sarah, on the numbers of carers who are, whatever their circumstances, not building up a record for the new state pension?
So what we'll do is we'll give you all the analysis that we've got on how carers...
Well, including that, if we can. Jack, anything else? Sarah, Andrew and Duncan, huge thanks for coming here this morning. It's good at ending this inquiry. We'll report soon.
Great, look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Has ended.